In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my champion build. This is an evolution of the Berserker build that uses 2 great swords, one in either hand, to deal substantial damage and takes advantage of jumping attacks. This is the level 50 version of this build, so if you wanted to see how this build evolved, watch on to find out. Note that I will be showing footage from the Liurnia of the Lakes, Raya Lucaria Academy, and the Software River areas of the game, so if you don't want to be spoiled on those, then you probably don't want to watch any further. The main difference between this build and the Berserker build is that there is more of a focus on damage resistance so that you can go in guns blazing without worrying about dying too much, and therefore you're using the Banished Knight heavy armor set. This gives you fantastic physical protection and some magic and other damage protections as well. It weighs a ton though, so you basically need 35 endurance with these 2 weapons in order to be able to mid-roll, which you definitely want to be able to do. So you're not going to be able to wear all of this until you probably hit level 50 or pretty close. You can actually farm this set from one of the knights in Stormvale Castle from the Rampart Site of Sacred Grace there. Just run down the steps and kill him and run back up and run back down and do this over and over. Probably took me 30 minutes to farm the whole set. It wasn't really that bad. The 2 weapons we want for this build are the Lordsworn's Greatsword and the Claymore. If you use these during the Berserker build, which you should have, then you're going to be just carrying over, upgrading those, so that's fantastic news. The talismans you want for this build are Erdtree's Favor, Blessed Dew Talisman, and the Claw Talisman. Erdtree's Favor is pretty much a must for this. I don't think you can ever unequip this because it not only gives you more stamina, which you desperately need, it gives you more equip load and more health. All things you need when you're going to run in frontlines combat and you're going to be aggressive as hell. Particularly that equip load if you want to use this armor set. If you want to use a lighter armor set, not as much of a deal breaker. If you're going for really, really heavy armor, then you definitely need this. Blessed Dew Talisman is there because it just slowly regenerates health, and because you have so much resistance, most attacks are going to do very little damage to you. So a lot of that health that you gets missing from you from trading damage or from just getting chip damage here and there is going to be regenerated by having this on you, and that'll save you a lot of health flasks. And the last talisman is the Claw Talisman. This is used to increase your jump attack damage. It increases it by 15%, which is substantial. And you want to try and do jump attacks pretty much every chance you get, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Much like the Berserker build, we don't use any spells or anything like that, and instead we rely on our Ashes of War to buff us and deal extra damage. And the Ashes of War that you want for this are Golden Vow and Determination. Golden Vow increases not only your damage, but also your defenses. I believe it buffs your defenses by about 5% per type, and it increases your attack power by about 10%. And it lasts about 40 to 45 seconds. So you want to put this on your left hand. It also does this for your group if they're close to you when you use it, which is great. You want to put this on your left hand, and you want to swap to it right before a tough enemy or right before a tough boss. It costs a lot of FP, so you're not going to use it regularly. But because it has that long duration, you can then go back to two-handing immediately afterward, and then you can use Determination throughout the fight. Determination buffs your attack power by about 60% for 10 FP, which is quite expensive, but very, very good for what it does. And since we're using heavy weapons, that's really good. And the thing that's really, really great about it is it actually buffs both weapons. The kicker here is that you have to land both attacks at the same time. Otherwise, you're going to consume that buff when the first weapon hits. And then if there's like a trailing attack from the second one, if it's just like a split second afterward, it won't be buffed. So jump attacks, both weapons land at the same time. Also a very, very good reason to use jump attacks. If you do a roll attack, for example, you'll notice the left-hand weapon sort of trails the right hand and you're only buffing one attack. So when you do a roll, hop up real quick and do a jump attack if you're buffed with Determination to get that extra damage. This is one of the reasons that we don't use Warcry for this build instead of Golden Vow, because Warcry only buffs your right-hand weapon. So that's more suited if you're playing with like a single colossal weapon type style, kind of like we did in the Barbarian build. It's not going to work here. It's only going to buff one of your weapons, whereas Golden Vow will buff both of them, and then Determination will buff both of them as well. Another really cool thing about Determination as well is that it actually boosts your critical damage if you use it right before you do a critical attack. So if you stagger an enemy, buff with Determination if you can do it quick enough. Some fights, the big enemies topple for a second, and it's really easy to pull off. Others, it's not so easy. It actually buffs your damage on critical attacks. It's weird, though. It seems to vary in the amount of damage it adds. I don't think it adds 60% to the critical attack, but it still adds a good amount of damage, and it's worth doing if you can get the timing down. So the general strategy with this build is pretty straightforward. It's going to play similar to the way the Berserker played. You're going to buff with Golden Vow before fighting a tough enemy, then use Determination as necessary. Determination is very, very fast cast. And then try and do a jump attack of some kind. Wait for the enemy to do an attack, roll, jump up, hit them, or just lead, run and jump into them. Because you have such heavy armor, you're not likely to get, die from it 1 hit or 2 hits, usually, depending on the enemy you're facing. However, you have to make sure you don't get staggered, so make sure if you're trading damage that you actually trade damage and you don't just take damage. This whole build revolves around doing jump attacks. That doesn't mean you have to do jump attacks every time. Sometimes you'll do a jump attack and the enemy won't die, and then a follow-up L1 or R1 will finish them off, and that's totally fine. Don't be afraid to use regular attacks as well. But trying to get as many jump attacks as you can is going to do you, the most damage for you. So you want to try and prioritize them when you can, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing you have in your arsenal. Talking about the weapons for a second, I have heavy on my Lord Sorin's Greatsword in order to increase my damage there. It outperforms standard after you have a certain amount of strength. About 19-20 strength is where it starts to outperform standard. So if you don't have that much strength, like let's say you're at 16 and you're almost 50, and then you start pumping strength like I did, probably want to stick with standard until you get right to about that 18-19 strength point. I actually left it on Sacred for the Claymore with the Golden Vow because the damage was higher, and you can still buff with Determination and Golden Vow, whether it's Sacred or not. But you could also put that on Heavy as you increase your strength, and eventually it'll probably outperform Sacred because you're not really increasing Faith. The stats you want to focus on for this build are primarily Endurance. This is going to give you loads of stamina and increase your equip weight, and this is what's going to allow you to use the Banished Knight armor set and dual wield 2 great swords at the same time. So you definitely need to prioritize that. You really don't need to focus on strength or dexterity at all unless it's just to meet the requirements for the weapons this early on in the game. And the other stat you want to focus on is Vigor. This is going to increase your health so that you can trade blows and not die, and give yourself more health bar for that Blessed Dew Talisman to put in work and heal you up over time. I do want to mention as well that I have put a few points into mine as well to get over 80 FP. This is because Golden Vow costs 40 FP and Determination is 10. That gives you forecasted Determination during your Golden Vow without having to chug a pot. It's kind of nice math. You don't have to do that. You could actually go more mind or less mind, but less mind is going to make it so that you really have to pot very often. Just a couple final tips about this build. Use Determination often. It's very, very good to use. It's very, very low cost. You can get like 8 casts of it if you have 80 FP. Use it when you need to. If you can't one-shot an enemy with a jump attack, use Determination so that you can one-shot them, and, just allocate your health and FP pots accordingly so that you have enough FP and HP between checkpoints. But if you can't one-shot an enemy, you definitely want to use Determination with a jump attack. You can actually use other weapons for this build. You don't have to use the Lord Sorin's Greatsword or the Claymore. If you're coming from the Berserker build, it's probably easy to do, and since that's what I was doing, that's what I just focused on. But essentially, what you really need is Determination here. That Determination buff is huge. It's going to boost your damage by a lot. So you want to make sure that you have Determination. Whatever you want to put on the other weapon is fine. You can use another Greatsword. It can have magic damage on it or fire damage. It doesn't matter because Determination is going to buff it anyway. But you will lose out on Golden Vow if you do that. So make sure if you have something in the left hand that it's some sort of long buff or something like that, because you're not going to be able to use it while you're two-handing in combat very easily. You'd have to swap to it to use it and then swap back, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of the build. So make sure if you're using another weapon, it's got some sort of good buff on it that doesn't need to be swapped to very often. And lastly, there are other really good talismans for this build that you can use if you want. For instance, the Green Turtle Talisman regenerates your stamina faster. You have a huge stamina pool, so this is helpful. And also the Carrion Filigreed Crest reduces the cost of your skills. Golden Vow is 40 and Determination is 10, so getting those reduced will allow you to use them more easily. The problem is that this build is very talisman hungry. There are a lot of good talismans for it, which is great. It's better to have too many, talismans you want to use than only have a couple that work well for your build and just kind of fill in the rest. But you can use either of those as well to sort of amplify your build. And when you get a 4th talisman slot, you'll probably put one of those in there. But you could sub out one of the other ones, for instance, like the Claw one or a Blessed Dew Talisman for one of those if you really, really want. That's all for our champion build. I think the next build we're going to be doing is the Bloodblade, the evolution of that. So stay tuned for that build. We got more builds on the way. Hope you guys are enjoying.